Are you not entertained? I hope so. Okay, so Thursday Night Football picks went really, really well. I love Jamar Chase in the captain. He was my number one captain play just because there's so many good plays on that showdown slate. And I mean, if there's the ownership was going to be split, Jamar Chase has like an amazing ceiling. He was my favorite play. He went off, just crazy off. 3 touchdowns, like 260 yards. So he was definitely a good call in the captain. Hopefully you follow along with that. Obviously, I love Burrow to complete the stack. I love Lamar. I was going away from Derrick Henry. He was fine with 14 fantasy points, but if you faded Derrick Henry and went other ways, you probably would have done pretty well. And I also hit on Mark Andrews. So I definitely handed out some pretty good plays. I whiffed on Deontay Johnson, who I did like. I thought he'd get more involved. Instead, Rashad Bateman scored a touchdown, and Nelson Aguilar scored a touchdown. And even Tylan freaking Wallace scored an 84-yard touchdown. So if you hit with me on those other big plays, you just needed to get 2 value picks right, and you could have won big. So hopefully you did end up cashing or even doing really well on Thursday night. Yeah, and if so, give this video a like, drop a comment, let me know how you did. I am doing this one today for the Week 10 Sunday London game between the Giants and the Panthers. And this is a shout out to Marquise, one of our loyal followers, always dropping comments and engaging with the community and everything. We appreciate you. So I'm going to try to do a Sunday Night Football showdown too, but I'm dropping this one first because this is kind of an interesting showdown slate that I'm going to be playing. And I think there is edge to be had. So, if I help you out in any way, and even if you're new to the channel, just hit that like button. Just promotes confidence in the channel that we know we're doing something right and we're helping you, and what we're doing is helping the community and all that stuff. So smash the like button, follow the channel, hit subscribe, and let's get going here. So Giants and Panthers, obviously this is a disgusting London game, but there's money to be won. And there is a lot to like in general in this one, just because the Panthers are not a good defense. And while the Giants have a good pass rush, they still can give up production. So let's look at the captain position. There is ownership up at rotogrinders.com. So I'm going to go off of that right now. Unsurprisingly, Tyrone Tracy and Malik Neighbors are carrying the most ownership by like miles and miles. I don't think that is going to hold. I think that's going to even out to some degree. I think the Tracy ownership will probably end up dipping a little bit, and Daniel Jones's ownership will spike, and then perhaps we'll get a little bit more ownership for, maybe Bryce Young, just because he's a quarterback. He's going to be, playing the whole game. There's a couple other guys we can look at too as well. But hey, it makes sense. Neighbors and Tracy are by far the best 2 options in this game. The Panthers are horrendous against, against running backs. They're dead last against running backs, and against quarterbacks, they are bottom 5. So the Giants make sense here. I will say right away for 2 reasons. Well, the main reason is we want to look at Panthers a little bit here more than everybody else is going to, because the field so far is stacking the Giants. The top 3 owned guys in the captain are Giants. And don't get me wrong, for good reason. They look like amazing plays. I definitely want a lot of ownership or a lot of exposure to Malik Neighbors and Tracy and Daniel Jones, all in the captain and then the flex. I want that ownership. But I am absolutely going to, in a lot of my lineups, shift them over to flex and look for a different way to get creative. That said, I do not mind eating the chalk here, especially with Neighbors. He has such a massive ceiling, such a big role usually, and even Tracy has such a good matchup against Carolina that I don't mind getting a lot of exposure to them in the captain and then finding ways to get creative, whether I'm leaving money on the table in the flex or I'm just going and getting guys that nobody else is on. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But I'm not going to waste time on Neighbors and Tracy and even Daniel Jones. They all look great. The Panthers are a really good matchup. Daniel Jones went off last week for 24 fantasy points. He's got the dual threat upside. We just don't need to waste any more time on those guys. They look amazing. The problem is they're going to be very, very owned. So if in the lineups where we don't want to eat that chalk at captain, what are we going to do? I think one of the quickest ways to differentiate and still, maximize your lineups is to go target some Panthers. I mean, look at Bryce Young is not a good quarterback probably. But he's going to play the whole game. He had 15 fantasy points 2 weeks ago. He showed a little bit of upside by rallying the Panthers to upset the Saints last week. Only 10 fantasy points, so that's discouraging. The Giants do have a good pass rush, so they could get to him here for sure. but it's likely that he'll be throwing a lot, playing from behind. So I like the narrative of the game flow in this game for him. And he's also coming in with 3% ownership. So why don't we just target Bryce Young in the captain and say, yeah, Panthers are going to suck for the first 2 or 3 quarters, and then they're just going to throw all day to end the game, and maybe he can get 20 fantasy points or 15 to 20 fantasy points and get us there in the end. We'd still get exposure to Neighbors and Tracy and Jones. We'd still eat that chalk. We just slide it over to flex and hope that 3% captain-owned Bryce Young hits to some degree. You can also go with Chuba Hubbard at 9.8K. What is he? That's in his flex. So 14.7. He's a little bit expensive for what is not, the most amazing matchup. The Giants are, let's see, it's kind of middle of the pack, I think. Where actually do they rank against the run? Yeah, pretty middle of the pack. So it is what it is. It's a middle of the pack matchup. And Hubbard's had a massive role. The one thing I'd keep an eye on is if Jonathan Brooks officially gets activated for this game. He has been removed from IR, so he can play. He doesn't have a big projection, though, so obviously it's possible that he will, not play, and it's also possible even if he does play, he'll be really limited. The Panthers also just signed Hubbard to this big contract extension, which makes me think that for right now, they're kind of committed to him being the guy, and then maybe those kind of form like a 1-2 punch like they did in years past. But hey, Hubbard is expensive, and the Panthers will probably be playing from behind in this game, but are we really trusting the Giants to dominate that much? I don't think we should. He's coming off a 21-point fantasy outing. He's had 11-plus fantasy points in every game but 2 on the year. He has a pretty rock-solid role. Even if Brooks is back, Hubbard looks like a really, really good play. And the fact that he's coming in as the, 4, 5, 6, 7th owned captain, come on. 2% owned Hubbard in the captain. That looks amazing. So I totally understand the hesitance to target a Bryce Young option in the captain. Hubbard has to be my favorite tournament captain on the showdown slate. Now, I don't have a ton of confidence that he's going to come out here and get like 25, 30 fantasy points or anything. But, I mean, if price and game flow and matchup and all this stuff is working against him, come on. He looks amazing as a captain. He would be my flag plant as far as getting different in tournaments. Obviously, Malik Neighbors, Tracy, and Jones are the safest captains. And for most of your lineups, the best route would be to captain one of them, which Neighbors is my favorite, and then go and get different in the flex. But if you want to get different right away, slide those guys to flex, and let's captain Hubbard, and we can consider captaining Bryce Young as well. Other guys we can consider would be Wan'Dale Robinson, just because he does have a solid role for the Giants, and Darius Slayton is out. And he's definitely pretty safe. He doesn't have a massive ceiling, especially with Neighbors around, but he's pretty safe, and he can definitely be considered there. I prefer him in the flex, but he's a fine captain. Theo Johnson, 6K flat. Pretty nice price for a guy who's pretty involved. He did score last week. He is a little bit banged up, so keep an eye on his status, but he is in play. I think the Panthers are pretty bad against tight ends. Yep, dead last. So that looks good. And again, Darius Slayton is out, so a little bit more usage to go around in the Giants passing game. Let's see who else. If Theo Johnson is out, we can entertain Daniel Bellinger. I don't really want to captain him, but he's really, really cheap, and then you can go get whoever you want. But this is not a showdown slate like the Bengals-Ravens game where we have like 4 or 5 guys we absolutely want in most of our lineups. We have like 2 or 3 guys that we really, really want, and then the rest it's kind of like we can kind of pick our spots. So one other guy I'll mention for captain, and that, if I'm ignoring other guys, it's not that I refuse to play them. It's kind of like they're just not priorities. If the system spits them out and makes them a priority for captain, okay. I would just probably prefer to use them in the flex. But one other guy I will mention, well, two other guys to mention. I will mention David Moore because he is carrying some ownership because he's 4.5K. He played a lot of the snaps last week for the Panthers, who are still down Adam Thielen. So, he's going to play. I don't have a lot of confidence in him. I would probably rather play Jalen Coker, who is playing about 50 to 60% of snaps. So he's not playing as much as David Moore right now. He should be, though. He's a better player. So, if he's projected, he has a better projection. So I don't know if I trust the ownership just yet right here. But if it sticks, I would much rather play Coker over David Moore for sure. Oh, and the other guy would be Jalen Hyatt. I don't trust Jalen Hyatt at all. His production on the entire year is 1 catch for 6 yards. But Darius Slayton played like 92% of snaps last week. He had played 100% of snaps the previous 2 weeks. And as it stands, Hyatt is going to be the 3rd wide receiver for the Giants, and he's going to have a chance to actually show what he can do this week. Against the Panthers, I mean, why not? Why not roll the dice and bet on Jalen Hyatt finally, popping off? It's one of the best matchups you can find. The Giants are favored. The Giants are expected to, produce here. 3K in the flex or 3K in the captain. I'm game for rolling the dice there for sure. And obviously he's still viable in flex. All right, let's kick it over to flex and let's talk about what if we just eat chalk? How do we get different? So obviously Tracy, Daniel Jones, neighbors, they're popular for good reason. I have no problem eating that chalk, but if you do, you have to get different. Otherwise, you're just going to dupe your lineup and you're not going to win anything. So if we're looking at ownership, flex ownership, I mentioned Theo, Hubbard, those guys look good. Jadavion Sanders is another guy who is banged up, but he looks really good at 4.4K in the flex. I don't want to ignore Xavier Legette. By the way, he's also viable in captain too. The ownership is a little bit wonky there. It's projected for like 1% ownership. I don't believe that at all. I think Legette is a perfectly fine captain play. He's just a little bit expensive, so I don't know if I want to commit to a Panthers wide receiver at almost 9K in the captain, but he's definitely in play. But then if we're looking for ownership, if that's actually where his ownership is at 25%, I like that a lot in the flex. Jalen Coker 15%, Hyatt 14%. So you can really get different very quickly in the flex if you end up going chalky at captain. So for the defenses and kickers, I think the kickers they're not very productive. I mean, it is a London game. It's overseas. It's early in the morning. So I feel like maybe it's possible the offenses could struggle. It is a game with a low total. I'm okay with the kickers. I just don't see them as priorities. They don't really excite me. I think the defenses are certainly in play. The Giants are not a trustworthy offense. They should have success here, but it is a game overseas, and it's still the Giants. They tend to move the ball okay, but they don't really finish the job a lot of times. So you can take a shot on the Panthers. They're not going to be owned. Obviously, between the two, the Giants stand out. They just have a good pass rush. And Bryce Young is not very reliable. So I think the Giants are a fine option. Neither of these defenses are really going to be owned despite the low game total. So I think sliding in the Giants D could be good if that ownership sticks. You're just going to have to update tomorrow morning and just see where the ownership is. Sunday morning, see where the ownership is. All right. So, excuse me. So overall, I don't mind eating the chalk with the Giant studs. I don't think the ownership is going to be quite what we're seeing right now. But even if it was, I mean, I don't really want to eat 30% Malik or 25% Tracy. But these guys are the plays of the slate. There's no doubt about it. I just think we can definitely get instant leverage by, you could go with the lowest owned of that trio, Daniel Jones. That makes sense to me. Go Daniel Jones in the captain, stack him with neighbors, maybe get in Tracy too. Or we just get instant leverage with the Panthers stack. I mean, if Hubbard's really going to be unowned, Hubbard is like the most interesting captain on the slate. Bryce Young looks good. And then I would still entertain the Panthers wide receivers, even though the matchup is not amazing. Coker, David Moore, I guess. But if David Moore is going to be pulling this kind of ownership, I don't really want David Moore at all. I would much rather have Coker, and Legette would probably be the number one Panthers wide receiver I'd look at. And then obviously, as I noted, there's a lot of value to like on this slate. But my flag plant captain is going to be Hubbard, just because he has such a big role. And if this game can stay remotely close, Jonathan Brooks be damned. He is going to be a crazy value at captain. So anyways, update the ownership, make sure that it's current, and so you have something actually to work from. And definitely always use a lineup optimizer when you're working on any DFS slate, just so you can have a good idea of where projections are, where the field is at with ownership, and then you can go from there. All right, hopefully this helped you out. If it did, give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and good luck.